I can remember back in the 80s when I was dating a librarian. Didn't go out with her for very long because she made a backhanded compliment that I still remember to this day. She said something like,
"You're interesting when you talk about travel."
Yeah, just like that. Well, this isn't a story about travel. This is a studio tale. And hopefully it'll be interesting to the right kind of people. That's what I'm hoping for. I guess the story starts with my grandfather, who was working at Columbia Studio. He was a musician and a music editor. He was also a trombone player in the Columbia Studio Orchestra. He had a part in a movie called Slightly Honorable where he plays a band leader. I've got a clip of that.
I'll be wearing an armored car.
Hip, hip, I feel a bum, bum, bum. I know the symptoms every time they start. Feel as though I'm reeling round the floor. Boy, got me. I can't deny it. I can't keep quiet. Come on and take me, dark and handsome. You pretty after me. Hip, 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 because he knows I'm willing to be weak with a guy that's got a...
Also some publicity shots with Henry Fonda and some other people who are unknown to me. Well, he got my mother started in the studio. She started working at Disney. She was secretary of the art department, and like most departments, all the paychecks come to the secretary, and she actually handed Walt Disney his paycheck every week. So when I was visiting my mother at Disney Studio, I was at that age where it had happened more than once. I was mistaken for one of the Musketeers named Cubby. They'd call out to me, "Hey, Cubby," because I was probably the same age and height. "No, not Cubby, I'm just here to see my mom." When I was attending school in Beverly Hills, I went to Beverly Vista Elementary School and Beverly Hills High School. There were some kids in the classes who would later become actors. Some were acting at the time. Barry Gordon and Mike Burns were each acting, and let's see, Barry Gordon was, I think it was the Danny Thomas Show. Mike Burns was, he was on a TV show called Wagon Train. All the kids in school called him Kooky because he would always, be combing his hair. He was a good-looking kid. Barry Gordon one time did some singing in a music appreciation class that I was in. Barry Gordon did a little singing, and I think the teacher, because she knew he was an actor, got all cheered up and cried. And probably back then I thought to myself, oh, please give me a break. And if you saw the movie American Graffiti, the way he was dressed there with a plaid shirt outside of his pants was exactly the way he used to dress in school. And then later he became an actor and won an Oscar. And I always wondered, why an Oscar? Richard Burton never won an Oscar. Why Richard Dreyfuss? I think it was for The Goodbye Girl. Sue Lyon at Beverly Hills High School had played in Lolita. She played the main role in Lolita. And she was one of the cutest girls in school. I remember that. Later on, when I had a job delivering papers, I had two routes back to back, residential and business. This was in Beverly Hills. The business end of the paper route was north of Wilshire, and one of the places I delivered newspapers to was the William Morris Agency. And just like my mother, who used to deliver Walt Disney his paycheck, I used to take the newspapers up the elevator, and I delivered the newspaper to Sammy Davis Jr. So it was kind of similar in a weird way. After the paper route, still living in Beverly Hills, my mother enrolled me for a ballroom dance class at Ted Reardon Dance Studio, and I wound up becoming an assistant teacher there. We used to teach young kids to dance. cha-cha, triple step, waltz. We put on dance exhibitions and go to their summer camp at Camp Kramer in Malibu. Some of the other members of the troupe were Mike Zimbalist. I think he was a nephew of Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. Some of the students there, the daughter of George Fenneman, who was Groucho Marx's sidekick. I remember George Fenneman going in to see his daughter, watch her dance. All my mother's friends at Disney were either artists, set decorators, or even art directors. In these pictures, she's sitting with Joel Schiller. Joel Schiller, if you look at the IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, you can see that he worked on movies like The Muppet Movie.
I'm on my way to Hollywood. Hollywood? Hollywood?
How the Muppets first got together.
Why are you hopping up and down? Because I'm hopping mad.
A long time before Joe Schiller worked on the Muppet Movie, and while he was still a Disney artist in the art department, he designed these leaves, these familiar leaves on the Alice in Wonderland ride at Disneyland. I don't think there's anybody that doesn't recognize this. Dean Tavoularis was an Oscar winner for The Godfather, among others. Jack Marlowe, the screenwriter, has worked on some of the TV shows Wild Wild West, The Millionaire, and I thought it was I Love Lucy, but I could be wrong about that. I was such a young kid at the time. I liked Jack Marlowe a lot, and I used to say, Mom, why don't you marry Jack? It wasn't until I was a teenager that I realized that he was gay. One of the artists named Bobby, he went by the name of Theo, was a Disney animator and also a painter. He was quite the artist. But his paintings were always hanging up in the house, and here's one of them that I had to look at for all the years growing up. He also gave my mother the recipe for Serbian goulash. It's like a hot dog pepperoni stew. I used to love the way it tasted, and occasionally I would ask her to make it, and she would. But later on, as an adult, when I asked her for the recipe, she said, no, you can't have it. Well, I did figure it out on my own, and I've made it since. And I think I pretty much matched it. If you want the recipe, just pause the video and copy it down, because I know this is it. This is a picture of my mother in front of the greens department at Disney. It's like a nursery where if the set required a palm tree or a eucalyptus, they would just bring it over on a potted plant for the shooting, and then when they were done, they'd take it back to the greens department. This is a picture of Paul, whom my mother met through Jack Marlowe, the screenwriter. Paul also took some writing credit for an episode of Wild Wild West. Paul was only a year older than I was. He became her third husband and somehow talked her into moving the two of us to Alabama. He was born in Selma. I had a girlfriend at the time at the high school, and the two of us would cry all the time because we were upset that I had to leave school and go with my mother and her husband to Alabama. I think her father told me to stop seeing his daughter because she would come home sad all the time. I was sad too. I was so upset that I lit up a cigarette in the nurse's office at school, and I got suspended from school for about 2 or 3 weeks. My mother had that story wrong. She thought that I was expelled. That's what she told her friends. But she pulled me out of school and we went to Alabama. That was the last time I saw my grandmother. We had a duplex in West LA, just near Hamilton High School. After we moved, she sold the house and went to Ohio, and I never saw her again. Well, my mother and Paul didn't work out. We, after about maybe 8 months, we came back to LA, and she got a job back at Fox again. In 1966, when I got a draft notice and had to appear for a physical, The examiner told me that if I can get a note from my personal doctor showing that I've got a history of asthma, I can get a medical deferment. So we went to the family doctor, Dr. Rexford Kennemer, who was also known as Physician to the Stars. His clients included Frank Sinatra and Elizabeth Taylor. I started working at Fox also when I turned 18. Here's a picture of my new friend that I met at Fox Studio, Greg. He also was in the movie Paint Your Wagon. They had quite a few movies going on at the time that I was there. I remember Sand Pebbles with Steve McQueen, Paint Your Wagon, Lee Marvin, In Like Flint with James Coburn, and then the TV shows like Felony Squad, Planet of the Apes, and Batman. Starting the job at Fox Studio, I joined the Studio Utility Employees Union. That was a good thing because they provide job security and a good wage. I maintained a friendship with Greg for about 18 years. We both started on the same day. I can remember seeing Ann Margaret pull into the Fox lot on a motorcycle. She'd go right up to the guard shack. She'd go past the guard shack. She didn't have to wear a helmet back then in those days. And that flaming red hair. She was really something to look at. Another great looking actor that I used to see a lot was Tony Curtis. Good looking guy, Tony Curtis. And Steve McQueen, who was filming Sand Pebbles at the time, was a motorcycle rider. He would like to talk to the crew about his motorcycle. I remember standing around listening to him talk about bikes. 2 years later, I got my first motorcycle, but I was sure interested. One of the movies I was working on was Planet of the Apes, kind of like a glorified laborer. Let's call it a standby prop maker. But we had to build those bat caves, and I have a fear of heights, and I just really hated climbing up on scaffolding to drape aluminum foil over the framework so they could crumble it up and paint it. Everything had to be painted. They call it age, and they just take paintbrushes and throw paint on like this. The age, the caves. Planet of the Apes was filmed at the Fox Ranch. It was later known as the Malibu Creek State Park, but at the time it was mostly just land leased out by Fox Studio with Western movie sets and the Planet of the Apes set up. On the Fox Ranch they had rovers, part of the transportation department. If you needed a ride from one of the sound stages to the wardrobe department, or from the stage to your dressing room, or from your dressing room to the commissary, they'd have rovers you call transportation, and they'd send over a station wagon and you'd jump in the rover. Well, even though I was not in production, we were in construction, once in a while I'd take a rover. But I remember a lot of the grips and prop makers would be standing around, a rover would pull up, and Edie Williams was getting out. And she'd get out of the rover, she'd swing her legs out. All the guys were standing around because they wanted to see her get out of the rover. And she'd say to the guys, "Okay guys, here's your breather shot for the day." Very crass. She was working there as a choreographer. And also with Tammy Grimes, and I never figured out what Tammy Grimes was doing at the time, but they were usually seen together. But Edie Williams was a choreographer. She was also married to Russ Myers, who did the Valley of the Dolls movie. And I think Edie Williams has been in a couple of movies herself. Okay guys, here's your beaver shot for the day. One of the sets we were around quite often was Lost in Space. And I wasn't there at the time they were shooting, but I remember seeing Robbie the Robot, and they always had a pneumatic camera dolly somewhere on the set, and there'd be air left inside. So it was still raised and lower. I was a teenager, but we were kind of messing around. I used to like to take rides on this pneumatic dolly. There was no camera at the time. We'd just go up and down on the stage. And we used to find film clips on the ground from the film cutting, and we'd hold it up and we'd say, "Oh yeah, I know who that is. Yeah, I think I was on that stage that day." And here's a picture of Greg and me with my VW panel truck. It was a 67. One of the prop makers that sold us pot drove a panel truck, and I guess you can say he was a big influence on me. I just had to have one. I got one of the prop makers to help me with the masonite flooring, the plywood paneling, and even had some stained glass contact paper in the rear window. On the Batman set, same thing with the Batman set. We used to have to lacquer up that Batmobile to get it to shine just before every shooting. I didn't realize it was going to be a spoof, because we worked hard on that. When I saw it on TV for the first time with those phony fight scenes, I was so disappointed. All this hard work for this? Later on, much later on, after I left the studio, I ran into Adam West in Brentwood. He was working out at a gym, and I was working for a wholesale restaurant supply. And my truck was blocking his car. So when he came out, he couldn't get out. He had to ask me to move my truck. I told him, you know, we used to work together over at Desilu on the Batman set. He said to me, oh, so I'm glad that you've got a real job now. I remember seeing Julie Newmar on the set of Batman. You know, these sound stages at Desilu, where Batman was made, had a ramp that used to go up. And we'd take some lumber from the mill, lumber, stage braces, anything like that we could get on this cart, and we pushed that cart up the ramp. And I remember saying with a lot of the other laborers in the labor department, 2 years of college and we're pushing this cart around like a mule. Well, when Julie Newmar would go into the soundstage, she wouldn't bother going up that ramp. She was tall, right? So she'd just swing a leg up and hoist herself up onto the dock just with one leg, the way she was very athletic. I remember seeing her do that. I'd be remiss not to talk about the coffee truck experience at Fox Studio. Same time every day, the grips, electricians, and prop makers would wait for the sound of the horn. They'd come out of the sound stage and take a break on the coffee truck. This truck had a license plate that said OOU 812. And the driver and owner of that truck was very proud of that license plate. Well, everybody knows that these electricians and prop makers, grips, were all movie star wannabes. They were hoping that one day they'd get discovered. There was one bodybuilder who was a competitor of Mr. Olympia, and he'd take his shirt off, flex. Well, he had a problem with his back. He had what looked like a covering of jello from a propane stove that he tried to ignite. Ever since then, I wouldn't have anything to do with propane barbecues. On the Desilu lot, most of the people used to ride bicycles. The labor foreman, the head of security, mostly department heads would ride bikes. But somebody thought that I needed a bike. So I brought my Royce Union bicycle onto the lot. And one of the sign painters made a sign inside the bike, like everybody else had, with their name on it. They used Old English lettering, which I didn't care for. And they used to call me Randy Dandy at that studio. Well, I worked for a guy named Red. People used to say, red on the head like a dick on a dog, and Randy Dandy meant horny gigolo. And, you know, people just had all these little inside jokes, and you just had to either tolerate it or laugh it off. After Batman was finished shooting, we all went back to the Fox lot, the main lot, and I was working with the guys on the tin shop. Tin shop is like sheet metal, where they would fabricate and, you know, they'd bend metal in the big presses. And the head of that department, sheet metal, the tin shop, took a liking to me, and he said, if you go back to LA Trade Tech and get your 2-year degree, take geometry and sheet metal, I'll put you to work in the tin shop. I'll be making like 1.5 times the amount that I was making as a prop maker or a laborer. So I took a withdrawal card in the union and went to LA Trade Tech. The last set that I worked on at Fox Studio was the Hello Dolly set. And let me tell you, that was hard work. The cobblestones, that wound up being a permanent set that you can still see if you drive down Olympic Boulevard and look into the Fox lot. You can see New York Street. that was the last thing that I worked on. While at LA Trade Tech, I got pretty sick and I wasn't able to finish that, so my next job was working in a band. I was playing drums in a band. The name of the band I was in was called Corroboree. We never gained any popularity. A record employee from Columbia did agree to come and listen to us one time, and he said to me that I could benefit from listening carefully to Elvis Presley's drummer. So he must have thought that I had some potential. Our manager, got us a job at Round Robin in Glendale. It was a topless place. That job didn't last long because we couldn't perform on the same stage as the dancers. We volunteered to do a battle of the bands at Ledbetter's in Westwood. We followed a group on stage called Portable People with twin drummers. After we were on, Kenny Rogers in the first edition appeared that day. But I did get some 1- and 2-day calls. I still was a union member, local 724, Studio Utilities local. And they would get us some 1-day calls, some 4-day calls. I worked at General Service. We worked on a Gallo wine commercial. I remember having a 1- or 2-day call at Columbia Studio. And one story at Columbia Studio, I was working with some painters, and we were pushing scaffolding down one of the streets leading up to the entrance by the guard shack. And so we're pushing this scaffolding down, and there was a green Mustang alongside of us, and one of the guys said, "You know who that is in the car? That's Barbara Eden." So we all started pushing that scaffolding. We got around her, and we started trying to pass her. All of a sudden, she stops the car at the guard shack, throws the driver door open, jumps out, and we have to pull back on that scaffolding. I'm not really sure why she had to jump out of the car to talk to the guard. Another lot we were working was Universal Studio. And that job lasted, it wasn't just a 1-day call or a 2-week, I think that lasted the entire summer. And the department I was working in, I didn't know that they even had a department like this at Fox or Disney. It was called Office Service. So we used to deliver furniture to some of these departments. And one of the things that we did was deliver a cutting room table to the home of John Cassavetes. We took that cutting room table over to his house. About 2 of us I had to do it. It was heavy. We brought it inside, and to show his appreciation, he gave each one of us, and I don't remember exactly, it was either a $5 or a $10 tip. I was thinking it was $10. It was a generous tip at the time. He was married to Gina Rollins, who was in a movie called Faces that I used to like, so I was pretty familiar with who John Cassavetes was. He's a director. The big story that was on the news back then was the murder of Ramon Navarro, a silent film actor, back in old Hollywood, killed in his Hollywood Hills home. And the news story finally was that they caught up with the killer. And this was on the news. I was watching it live. They were leading the killer away in handcuffs. And the killer was none other than my mother's 3rd husband, Paul. The story was that the killer thought that Ramon Navarro had lots of money in the house because he read a story about Navarro saying he's got a lot of money in the house, meaning that he had done a lot of work remodeling. He took that to mean that there was a lot of money in the house, so they went up there and wound up killing Navarro, the silent screen actor. I ran into my mother's bedroom. She was married to Larry at the time. That was her fourth husband. The marriage she had with Paul was annulled. And I was all excited. I said, "You've got to come out here and see this." She got really upset with me for telling her all this in front of Larry, her husband. But I figured she'd need to know this. So moving on, my mother was a fan of boxing. And one of the fighters she used to follow, she had a fondness for, was Jimmy Hare. I wound up meeting Jimmy Hare on one of my trips at the airport, never talking to him. So who are you fighting next? And he told me about his upcoming fight. I thought my mother would get a big kick out of that when I got back from my trip.
You're interesting when you talk about travel.
You know, not that again. Back in the 70s, there was a movie out called Buster and Billy. I must have watched that movie 5 times. Wherever it was playing, we'd go out there to see it. I always wondered what happened to the actress Joan Goodfellow. Well, years later, probably late 70s or 80s, I noticed that she was appearing in a small play. I bought a ticket to the Playhouse, went to see it. In the audience, 2 seats away from me, was her co-star from that movie, Robert Englund, played Whitey in the movie. He also played Freddy Krueger in Nightmare on Elm Street. He was there to see his co-star. 2 seats down from me, nobody in between us. One of my favorite country singers at the time was George Jones. Although I had never seen him perform, never saw a video, had no idea what it was like to see him play. All I heard were his records. Well, I finally got a chance to go to the Palomino Club to see him. While we were there, waiting for him to come up on stage, he came out, he stopped at our table, and he put a cigarette out in the ashtray. And the girl I was with was also a George Jones fan, reached over and just held his wrist the whole time he was standing there. And I asked him if he was going to sing all of his hits. And he said, "Yeah, I'm going to do all the big hits tonight, and I'm going to put on a really good show." And then he went up, got up on stage. In 1986, I was on a vacation in Greece and Turkey. It was a Greek island cruise and a land tour. During the cruise portion, we noticed that there was a woman who repeatedly was having dinner with the captain. It was a small cruise ship, but she was having dinner at the captain's table. We thought maybe she was some VIP, but apparently not. When the tour was over, we were flying back from Athens to Amsterdam, and when we touched ground, they needed to do a security check. They wanted to go through all the checked luggage, and that took quite a while, probably overnight, so they had to put us up for the night. Well, having all that free time at the airport, I was talking to Michael Constantine. He was an actor, I think he was in Room 222, he played the principal, and he's been in other movies. He's Greek, and he was in Athens visiting his grandmother, so he's on his way home. So we've got this long layover after they do all the baggage checks. Finally, we get back on the plane, and now we're flying to New York. Well, that lady that was having dinner at the captain's table, it turns out, was on the previous flight 847, Amsterdam, from Athens to Amsterdam. That was the flight that was hijacked by Hezbollah. It was like a 2-week ordeal where they were flying from Algiers back to Lebanon, and they wound up shooting a serviceman, I think a Navy diver, throwing his body out onto the tarmac. I remember that story pretty well. So she went back on the same flight, and it was the flight that we were on, flight 847, because she wanted it to be right. She wanted to have it all right and just wipe it from her mind. Well, they bumped her up into first class, and she didn't want to fly by herself, and there was an empty seat next to her, so she brought me up to the first class section with her. After a while, she wasn't talking about her ordeal anymore, so it was all forgotten now. I don't know if that was the same trip, but I wound up talking to Leslie Nielsen, who was at the airport back in Los Angeles. I don't think he heard a word I said. I think he was hard of hearing. In the 80s, I think it was 86 or 87, I was dating a girl who worked at Paramount Studio in labor relations. We used to go to movies at the Paramount Theater on the lot every Friday night. I'd get off work, have to drive home to Harbor City, get changed, drive all the way back up to Hollywood, through the main entrance, tell the guard that I'm going to the Paramount Theater to see a movie. And after so many times, he'd see me drive in and he'd say, "See a movie." He didn't want to hear my story every time. He remembered me. We used to go to rap parties. Family Ties was in production there with Michael J. Fox. So we'd go to these rap parties, and because Michael J. Fox was short, and the girl that I was seeing was only 4'11", he'd have to have his dance with her every time he'd see her. So I would just stand by and I'd watch him dance with my girlfriend. And I talked to him. He was also interested in motorcycles. And I showed him a wallet-sized picture I had of my '62 Marshalls. He was interested, but didn't want to buy it because of probably the extended front end. That was a dumb thing that I did. Made that bike very unsafe. We used to go whale watching with the cast from Family Ties. We went to Raging Waters, and I remember seeing Eddie Murphy there with his one of his wives or his girlfriend, and he was a real stick in the mud. Had nothing to say. You know, he wasn't the cut up or the comedian that you'd expect him to be. They were having their Paramount Studios 70th anniversary big party, and the food was always really good, even during the rap parties. It was all catered, great food. Well, they had this 70th anniversary party outside one of the sound stages, and we were dancing to a live band, and on the dance floor near where I was dancing with my girlfriend at the time was Annette Funicello dancing with her husband, and she fell right down to the floor. She just fell, and I went over, and with her husband we helped pick her up. And I don't think anybody knew at the time that she had the Parkinson's disease. She was in a movie called Back to the Beach at that time, and no mention of Parkinson's, but that had to be the reason why she fell that night. I hadn't done any ballroom dancing since the 60s, those Ted Radin days. In '87, I decided to get back into ballroom dancing and enrolled in a class at Harbor College. And because women outnumbered men by such a large number, and I was picking up where I left off, they made me an assistant teacher. I wasn't having to pay for any lessons at all. So I was working with Margaret Michael at the Torrance Community Center, Hawthorne, and in Gardena as her assistant teacher. We'd go take private lessons and then teach the new steps to the students. So Margaret Michael was a judge at the international competitions, and she was even a doctor. She had a doctorate in ballroom and Latin dancing, but she was very British. And I used to have to drive up to her house, pick her up, and bring her down to the Hawthorne or the Torrance Community Center for the lessons. And she used to use an old turntable with records, spin records, and do the hokey pokey. I hated the music, but it was through that experience that I met my wife, Karen. When my mother died, she wrote me out of her will. I wound up getting some old photos and a big box that said nothing of value. Included my Cub Scout uniform, lots of photos, and there was this one drawing that they had done for her at Disney when she decided to leave Disney and go to work at Fox. It was done by the Disney artist, and it was signed by a lot of the studio executives. Well, I thought, well, this has to be worth something. So they were having an art collector show at the Anaheim Convention Center. So I took that down there, and I wound up selling that to somebody, and got some money for it because of the signatures that were on it. With Karen coming back from one of our vacations.
You're interesting when you talk about travel.
Oh, would you knock that off? Anyway, at the airport lounge, I saw Richard Simmons. Recognized him in an instant. Walked over to where he was sitting, and I started doing jumping jacks. He looked at me and said, "Keep doing that for the next 20 minutes." Just after we moved to Sacramento from the South Bay, we were at the state capitol building. Karen recognized a news reporter that she used to watch on TV. So we introduced ourselves. Her name is Nanette Miranda, and I exchanged a couple of photos with her on Twitter. Since then, we met the mayor of Elk Grove, got ourselves in the newspaper. They were having the Dickens Fair, and now I'm Facebook friends with the mayor. And then there was Kelly DeMarco, one of the anchors on KCRA, and she had done an interview with Diane Keaton. So I decided to give her a Diane Keaton hat, and she responded to my post saying, "Nice Photoshop, Randy." Since then I've talked to her and asked her what kind of sound editing software she uses, and she told me about Adobe Audition. Got me started with that. They were having a grand opening at a new RT station here in Sacramento, and we were talking with Melissa Crowley, the traffic reporter. Met her and her two daughters. So I'm going to wrap this up with the last little tidbit. In 2017, I got a letter from, I'll just say the name, Paul Ferguson. He wrote me a letter. He wanted to let me know that he thinks about me from time to time, expected that I would have been a studio executive by this time. Was surprised to hear that I was living in Sacramento. Now, I'm not sure how he found out where I live, but I think it was from an author who had contacted me, and I think it was through this guy that Paul found out my whereabouts.
Randy, over the years I've often wondered how you were doing. I'm surprised to hear you're living in Elk Grove. I always imagined you in Hollywood, working or even running one of the film studios. You certainly had the family and connections for it. Not that nepotism is enough, but it doesn't hurt, and you were smart enough to handle it. Also, I have a book of short stories on the internet. No War Stuff About God Anymore, Amazon.com, 286 pages, 19 short stories. Shipping is free. I believe you'll enjoy them. Anyway, write if you're able. Paul?
I got that letter. It took me by surprise. Since then, he passed away. I think he passed away 2 years later in prison. So that's the end of my studio tale.
Are you finished with all the name dropping? You sure have done a lot of it. Maybe you should try talking about one of your trips.
If you haven't already done so, subscribe to Grab Shot. Thanks for watching.